Whether it finishes him in 2 or 3 months' time or 2 or 3 years' time, there's no way of telling, because ultimately, only when the security services turn on him, the military and the security services, who are being blamed for everything that's going wrong, when they turn on him, then he is finished. And then the popular discontent will come through.
Sources in Kyiv say that 1.5 million households have been left without power after a wave of Russian airstrikes on the Ukrainian energy grid. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the attacks were on a very wide scale, hitting Ukraine's regions in the west, centre, south and east. Well, former director of the Royal United Services Institute, Michael Clarke, has written in the Sunday Times today, explaining that history tells us that Putin's terror tactics in Ukraine will, in the end, be his downfall. I'm pleased to say that Michael Clarke joins us now. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
So just explain that for people, because they may find it a bizarre concept that the tactics that Putin is employing now, you believe will be his downfall.
Well, the point is that they've not got a great historical pedigree of working. The idea of breaking the will of a population with air attack is just not true. It didn't work in the Second World War for either the Germans against Britain or Britain and America against Germany. It didn't work in the Vietnam War. There is no real evidence that you can break the will of a population. You can make everything worse. You can make people miserable. But a population that is already disposed to resist will not be any less disposed to resist by being brutalized with air attack. That's the point.
So why do you think Putin is adopting this strategy?
Well, there's two possibilities. I mean, one possible strategic logic is that by putting pressure on the population of Ukraine over the winter, it demonstrates to the Russians themselves that this is a serious issue and that they're now at war, even though they won't call it a war yet. That this is pulling all the stops out because Putin and Surovikin, his commander in Ukraine, are undoubtedly under pressure because of all the things that have gone wrong. So there is a sort of a strategic thought behind all of this, but that's much more domestically driven than anything else. But the other possibility, to be honest, which I finish with the article saying, is that I think it just makes them feel better. It makes Surovikin and Putin feel better when so much else is going wrong. And Surovikin in particular, I mean, he's the man who believes in putting pressure on civilian facilities. I mean, he was in charge in Syria in 2019 in Idlib. And before the ground offensive began in Idlib, the Syrian Russian ground offensive, they bombed all 24 hospital facilities first. So they bombed the hospitals in advance of doing anything else in order to make it clear to the civilians that this is ruthless and we take no prisoners. We don't care whether you suffer or not because you're part of the problem. That's the way he operates.
There's also significance, which you draw to in the article, of the lack of missiles that Russia now has. It's getting through its stocks.
Yes, all the information is that they've only got about a third of their precision missiles left. They started with about 1,800. It looks as if they've only got about 600 now, and they're not that precise. And it's actually very humiliating for Russia, one of the superpowers of the world, and it is one of the big powers of the world, whatever you say, that they have to go cap in hand to the Iranians, to the North Koreans for ammunition, and particularly for drones. In the case of the Iranian drones, the Shahed 136 is a very cheap, off-the-shelf drone. The point is you can have lots of them. It only costs $20,000 to produce each one, and that's extremely cheap by modern military standards. And that the Russians have got to go to Iran for it. It's astonishing. And it's not clear what the Iranians are getting for this. I think the mullahs have made a huge mistake in supplying these weapons because it really isn't clear what the Russians are giving the Iranians in return for the Iranians lining themselves up so directly with these terror attacks by the Kremlin.
How significant is, in modern warfare, the role of drones? The fact that you're talking about that they're effective, I mean, £20,000 is obviously a lot of money, but in war terms and military terms, it's a drop in the ocean. Does it change modern warfare?
It does in quite a lot of ways. We've known that drones are quite important for many years, but we haven't seen them used in a big war, a significant war like this one until now. And what my contacts in the Air Force say, as they look at this with obviously great professional interest, they say that air superiority now is probably a thing of the past, below 10,000 feet. You can be dominant in the air from 10,000 feet to 30,000 feet, that all of your aircraft are the only things flying. You can prevent the opposition from using that space altogether. It belongs to you. But below 10,000 feet, the place is full of drones. Very often very small ones, drones that you can hold in your hand, which actually do an important military job in surveillance or in dropping a mortar bomb or a grenade or something like that. And the sheer ubiquity of drones, cheap drones that the military, the army uses on the ground, are now a significant factor. And we, as I say, we've known this for a while, but we haven't seen it used until now. And it's making, I think, Air Force professionals reevaluate the way air power has got to work in the future.
You also write in your article in the Sunday Times today about the fact that internal opposition is building in Russia.
It is. We're not sure what sort of form it takes because there's no outlet for popular opposition, but we know that there's a great deal of disquiet building up, particularly because of mobilization, because it's beginning to affect lots of communities now, particularly outside Moscow and Petersburg. It's in the further east you go in areas of Dagestan and in the Siberian oblasts, the various Siberian oblasts, like Buryat, for instance. Places like that are recruiting very aggressively, and it's affecting people. But there's no legitimate way for that disquiet to come through. Ultimately, I've always been convinced that this will finish Putin. This war will finish him. But whether it finishes him in 2 or 3 months' time or 2 or 3 years' time, there's no way of telling. Because ultimately, only when the security services turn on him, the military and the security services, who are being blamed for everything that's going wrong, when they turn on him, then he is finished. And then the popular discontent will come through. But it won't be driven, I don't believe, by popular discontent. But undoubtedly, the United States President Biden got an intelligence briefing last week, which was sent to him with individual information about individuals in the Kremlin who were beginning to oppose Putin's policy. Now, we know that briefing was done. We don't know what the details are, nor should we. But American intelligence is sufficiently confident to talk about the fact that they have a briefing. I don't think they're just trying to create something where the wish of the father to the thought. I think they are onto something, but we just don't know how that may play out because Russian politics has become ever more obscure. Even in the last 6 months, we know far, far less about what's going on inside the Kremlin or inside any other community in Russia than we did, this time last year.